Hi everybody, it's Franny, and you know the drill by now. We're still waiting on Ferrari parts. Well, in the interim, let's knock out a few projects on the 356. I like to think of these cars in terms of stop, turn, go, and go's working great, but let's hit the first two, starting with those brakes. So when I hit the brakes on this car, it has a tendency to sort of swerve a little bit, and that's not good. It's been doing that for years, actually. But if you hit the brakes really hard, all four wheels will lock up, so I know they're working. It's just that they're not where they should be. So what we're gonna do is pull all four drums off the car, take a look inside there. I think we're gonna end up replacing some pads and maybe even some cylinders as well, but we'll know when we get in there. All right, well, we got a bunch to do. Let's go ahead and get to it. I have the car well supported on 4 jack stands. Now, 356 can be a little bit weird to get up on 4 jack stands. In the back, you've got your torsion tubes that stick out in front of the rear wheels. That's a great place to support the car. Up front, it's a little more fuzzy actually. What you're looking for are cross members and the structural bits underneath the car, but you gotta jack the car up as well. It's kind of a thing. On our car, our jack points are still good. They're good and solid, so I can use those as jack points, but a lot of old 356s you can't because they're kind of rusted. If you're doing this on your car, you've probably put it up on jack stands before, but it can be a little dicey, a little scary. And then once you get it up on the jack stands and you still have your jacks underneath there, make sure you pull and push a bit on it on the bumper and stuff, and just kind of make sure that the car is good and solid. I've already loosened all of the wheel nuts here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the wheel off and then we'll get to this brake drum. And something kind of neat about these wheels and lots of parts on this car, actually, they're actually date stamped. So on our wheel here it says 857, so our car is an early 58, so I think it was built in February of 1958, and so this is August 57. So these wheels are perfect for the car. They're original. All 4 wheels will have a date stamp on them. That's pretty cool. Getting our wheel drums off isn't all that difficult. We just pull this rubber cap off to start with. There we go, get that guy off. This cap is our bearing cover, and I'm looking at this and I do see a little bit of grease underneath there, so it's pretty well packed, which is good. Let's go ahead and pull this off. There we go. On our car, we swapped out the hub nut with a clamping style. This makes it so much easier to set the pressure on the bearings. It's really easy to get off as well. There's just a screw here on the side. We just loosen it up and we can pull this off. Before we pull the hub off, it's always a great idea to sort of spin it, make sure that the brakes aren't dragging, and then it spins freely. Another thing you can check is play. So top to bottom play here. A little bit, side to side, and a little bit. It's not really bad at all. I don't set these bearings to be super duper tight, so there's always a tad bit of play in it, which I don't think is really too bad at all. But the more important thing is that side to side is the same as up and down. That way your steering components are in good shape. We're on the right side of the car, so these threads are right-handed threads. And here's another shot of our hub nut. You can see there's a little R on there because we're on the right-hand side of the car. There's our lock screw there, and you can see the split. So you pretty much just put it on, get it exactly where you want it, and then just tighten that guy down, and this won't back out. These are wonderful. The original setup for the hub nut on a 356 is actually 2 sort of thin nuts and then a clamping plate between it with these tabs, and you sort of set it to where you need to be and then you push the tabs over. It's really difficult to get everything perfect. That clamping nut is 10 times better. Next we have our big huge washer here, big thick washer. And behind it is the race for the bearings. We'll go ahead and pull the bearing out as well, just so it doesn't fall out. Now on an A car with early spindles like this, these are going to be ball bearings. The later cars, the Bs and the Cs, all had conical roller bearings actually. So yeah, it's a full set of actual ball bearings for the front wheel. At this point we can pull the drum out. There we go. Well, that gives us a really good view of our brakes here. What we're really looking for is any weeping, any wetness in here where the brake fluid is dripping down onto the shoes, because that will cause our problem of sort of that initial swerve. You get a little teeny bit of brake fluid on them and they won't bite initially. When they get really hot, it burns off and then the brake pad seems to work again. That's kind of what I'm expecting to find somewhere around here on the car. Looking at our brake shoes, take a look at the thickness of the pad there. It's pretty darn thin. It's a little bit better up here at the top. The other shoe up here, it's much thicker and more consistent. We don't see any real leaking around here on the cylinder, so that's awesome. It all looks pretty dry in here, really. And we got all this grease on our axle and it's all dry behind it, so that means our seal is working really well also. Next, we're going to dismantle the brakes. We'll start by pushing these clips in and turning them 90 degrees. There we go, to get them to release. Before I release the springs, I always want to take a mental note and take a look at where the spring is actually attached, which holes, here and here. So you're going to want to make sure you get these in exactly the right spot. And if your memory's more like mine, I like to take pictures of everything so I don't forget where everything goes. And depending on how far you go rebuilding this whole system, you may pull these cylinders out as well. Note the orientation that the adjuster is up here at the top and at the bottom on the bottom one here. So that's kind of important. Easy enough to get these guys off. Pull them out like that and just carefully release that spring. Now, in order to be super certain that your cylinders are in good shape, it's always a good idea to sort of pull this rubber booty back a little bit, clean this a little bit, and just pull this back. And if there's any issues, there'll be a bunch of fluid coming out of here. And it's a good idea to sort of check this booty. Is it ripped anywhere? It looks fine. And looking in there, it looks like it's completely dry. That's a really good sign. I'd say these cylinders are just fine. And looking at this one, it's all nice and dry as well. So we're really good here. Well, that's really good news. I think our cylinders are fine. They were replaced maybe 10 years ago with actual Porsche new old stock parts. One thing you do have to be careful of, in this state, if you go touch the brake pedal and just push on it, it doesn't take much pressure at all. You'll literally push the pistons right out of these things. They'll just come flying out. Brake fluid will go everywhere. Hilarity ensues. Not a great time, actually. So if you're going to need to press the brakes and you've got these things apart, I think the best way to do it is to put a clamp over this. So I use like a C-clamp or something and sort of clamp them together like that. And then if they're tight like that, when you hit the brakes, it'll be fine. They won't come flying out and goo go everywhere. All right, well, this one looks really good, actually. I'm really happy with the state of this front right wheel. Everything just needs to be cleaned up here, and I think the butcher's bill for the front right wheel is just going to be a new set of shoes. You know, another thing to look at are these soft brake lines back here. I don't know, they were replaced same time actually as these cylinders were replaced, so about 10 or so years ago. Obviously, if these soft lines rupture, you'll lose your brakes. The other thing that can happen, which is kind of weird, is they can look fine on the outside, but they can be deteriorating on the inside. What happens is you hit your brakes and they'll form like a little bubble in here. So it'll pass the fluid through, but then when you take your foot off the brake, it holds the pressure and keeps that wheel brake engaged when you've gotten off the brake, and that's bad too. Since we're doing a brake service anyways, I think I'll probably go ahead and replace all of them as well. Well, I'm not going to bore you with all the cleaning we have to do with this. Let's take a look at that rear right wheel and see what we see back there. At the rear wheel, it's a totally different setup than the front. We have this huge 36mm nut we have to pull off, and it's a castle nut, and we have a cotter pin we have to get off as well. Well, let's go ahead and pull this cotter pin off real quick like a bunny. Now, this nut on the axle here is put on with a gazillion foot-pounds. So if you're not rocking one of these things, which is a torque multiplier, these things are amazing. I'll show you how this works. This thing's killer. Then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to pull your hubcap off. Through the wheel, you can get to this with the car sitting on all fours. Use a big cheater pipe and loosen this guy up. But this torque multiplier lets you do this while the wheel is up and off the ground. Let me show you how it works. This thing's killer. First thing we do is set our little gear here on our wheel studs and lock it down with a couple of our lug nuts. With our gear bit here in place, you can see that we've got the parking brake off. So let me go ahead and set the parking brake on the car. It's going to make our life a lot easier. Then all we need to do is just put our arm here over our 36mm nut and hook up our ratchet here, and we can just roll around this guy. And with our nut loose, we can just throw a 36mm socket on here and take it the rest of the way off pretty easily. All right, and note the big, huge, thick washer that's behind the nut. Take a look at these guys. Are they cracked? Do they look like they're in good nick? They look pretty good to me. We also have a bevel on the inside here. So that's on this side. So that faces inward, this bevel, and it's just because of these splines here. I just want to relief a little bit for that. We can pull our gear off. One thing I do want to mention about this gear is I did have to bore out these holes a little bit for the 356. This part is really made for a Volkswagen Beetle. It's got two settings on here. So the ones on the inside are for the Volkswagen Beetle. These guys on the outside are for a 5-stud drum here, which is what we've got. But the Porsche ones are just off by a little bit. It's not that big a deal. Just sort of bore them out enough so that you can get this guy on. Now the next quick step is super duper important. And if you forget it, it'll drive you crazy. We have the brake set, which means that our shoes are pushing up against this drum. We'll never get this drum out without taking our brake off. So let's go ahead and take our brake off real quick like a bunny, and we can get our drum off. Checking our wheel, it spins nicely, so we definitely don't have our brake on. That gives us a fighting chance. Now, depending on when the last time was this hub was off, this can be a real bear to get off, or it can just almost fall off. If the splines weren't greased and there's any type of corrosion in there, it can be really a bear to get off. So a couple of hits from a plastic hammer, and see this? Look at that. It's coming off pretty nicely. There we go. So that came off really easy. We're really lucky, huh? One cool thing to note inside the drum here is this sling cup. So if our seal is bad and we get any transmission fluid or oil out of that seal, hopefully this will catch it and fling it out. And it flies out and then comes out a little hole here on the other side. So that's kind of cool. These brake drums on the 356 are aluminum, believe it or not. This whole casting is aluminum, but there's a steel liner in here that's been pressed in. So these are really interesting parts. A little bit difficult to replace. I know that Porsche Classic does make replicas of this, but they're, oh gosh, I think they're $2,000 a drum or something crazy. Let's take a look at what we got here on the right rear wheel. There's only one piston for the rear brakes as opposed to the fronts that have two. Should see that big spreader bar there as well. And behind here, down there, we have our parking brake. Let's take a look at our brake pads. They actually look pretty good, huh? Still got a little bit of meat on them, but they are sort of separating a little bit from the actual shoe. So that's probably not a great thing. The surface of the pad doesn't look too bad. And is it contacting everywhere? It looks like it pretty much is, although it looks like it might have been stopping just part way down there. Looking on the other side, what do we see? Looks pretty good, same sort of thing. It looks like it doesn't contact all the way at the end. So that's kind of interesting. These must not be completely round. Springs look like they're in good shape. Now what about that piston up there? How's that look? I see a little bit of weepage or something coming out around the seals there, so we'll check that pretty carefully. Looking at the axle seal, looks really good. Everything looks really dry. So there's oil behind that seal in the actual axle tube back there coming off the transmission. This is similar to older Volkswagen Beetle, would be the same way. So we just want to make sure that seal is in really good shape, looks good. Let's go ahead and dismantle this. It's the same basic process. We're going to pop these guys off. Might be easier in this case to actually loosen the spring up first. All right, that should make this a little bit easier. There we go. And we've got a hook here down at the bottom for our parking brake, which we can get off, hopefully. There it goes. All right, so that's that. The easiest way to get the spreader off is to have the top of the pad still on the piston here and push it apart, and there you go. Pull this back, there we go. I am seeing a little bit of wetness here on this cylinder up here. Look at this. So take a look at that in there. See how wet and goopy that is in there? Yeah, that's not so great. So we've definitely got some weepage that's happening here on our piston. It's not too bad, but we're gonna have to address this. What does the other side look like? Well, no, I'm seeing some wetness in there as well. So not the end of the world, but we're gonna have to either rebuild or replace this cylinder. Well, it looks like the butcher's bill for the right rear wheel is going to be a set of the shoes, but also we're going to have to deal with this cylinder as well. At least a rebuild kit. I have a honer as well, so we can go in there and hone that a little bit. Try a rebuild kit on it. Otherwise, we're going to have to replace it. All right, let me go ahead and get to the two wheels on the other side of the car. I'll let you know what I find over there. One quick check you can always do is to look at the rear backing plate here. See how wet that is? This is the left rear wheel on the car, and you can see it's just wet and kind of schmutzy. And in fact, do you see that? There's even a little bit that's dripping off. You can see it dripping onto the wheel itself. So we definitely have a problem with this left rear wheel. This is the right rear that we just took off. And the backing plate at least is dry, but boy, look at it, it's pretty rusty. Looks kind of nasty in there. Maybe we can kind of spruce that up a little bit, make it look a little nicer. With all that schmutz on the left rear wheel, let's go ahead and get it apart and see what we've got in there. Well, looking at this wheel, not so good. This is the left rear. Look at all the goo there on the actual edge of the pad. Yikes, huh? And we saw that wetness on the back. Well, there it is. And look at our seal. Looks like the seal is seeping a little bit. You see that? Look at that right at the bottom. So that's not good. We definitely have to replace that seal. Now I've replaced this seal. I replaced it a couple of years ago, so looks like it failed. Oh boy, that's no good. And then our cylinders look like they're a little wet as well. So I think we're going to be into it for the same sort of thing, but these pads on these shoes here, we can't use these because they're oil soaked. So we're definitely in it for a new set of shoes. And look at that, same problem. Look at that, it's only contacting on half of it. And look how wet that is. Yuck. Boy, we're really going to have to clean all that up. Let's take a look at our piston up here. Looks a little wet to me. Yeah, look at that. Yep. And our piston is, oh my, look at all that. Look at that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is no good. This wheel is a mess. Oh my gosh, yep, that's a lot. What about this side of it? Yeah, this side is wet as well. Look at that. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's bad. Well, I think we found part of our problem, certainly. Boy, this wheel is really a mess. It's all leaking, the cylinder's leaking. I think we might even have our axle seal leaking as well. So yeah, this one is a mess. And the butcher's bill on this wheel, we're in it for a new set of shoes, definitely. Now, up here with our cylinder up here, I'll try, once again, we can throw a rebuild kit in it and hone it out. If I see rust inside of it, I don't know. We'll know more when we pull it out and take a look at it. I want to pull this whole backing plate off anyways because it's just, you know, it's really rusty. So we'll definitely pull this guy off and clean it really well. We'll see what we can do about this cylinder up here, and I think we're also going to replace this axle seal just to be safe. So that's pretty much everything for this one. Well, okay, last but not least, let's take a look at that left front wheel and see what we've got in there. I kind of forgot about this. Something to remember about the front left wheel is the speedometer cable goes through this hub right here. So there's a little cotter pin here. We just need to take that off. But it's the reason why this hub won't come off. It's because of this guy. Now, I've had problems with this wheel in the past, so I'm very curious as to what we'll find in there. And on the left-hand side of the car, these are left-handed threads, so clockwise to loosen, which is always feels weird to me. This is the wheel I've had the most trouble with, is the front left. It's always been a mess for me. And our cylinders were leaking, our brake pads were crummy, it's always been a disaster for me. Our seal seems to be holding really well. It's not wet behind the seal at all. Our top cylinder looks good. Nice and dry, actually. That looks really good. No problems there. That's good. Get it off with the edge of this. Yep, there we go. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at all that fluid in there. So that's not good. So we definitely have a leaky cylinder up here too. Look at that. Well, it's a good thing we took all 4 wheels apart and took a look at it carefully. Our butcher's bill for the front left wheel is going to be this cylinder here is weeping. So once again, maybe we can hone it and throw a rebuild kit in it, and hopefully we'll get that. The pads, since this guy was leaking, I don't trust these pads. They're not contacting all the way. They're much thicker on the bottom than they are on the top. They look like they're 2 different types. I put these pads in last time and I sort of cobbled it together. That's just not the way to go. That was a big mistake on my part. So I am going to buy all new pads. So this car is going to get a full set of pads, all 4 wheels. We're going to have to get a few rebuild kits, of course, for our cylinders. We have seals to do on the rear wheels. This rear seal here on the back of the hub looks like it's doing pretty well. I don't see any wetness around here on the inside of the drum, so it looks good. But I need to pull the seal out in order to get the bearings out so that I can completely inspect the bearings and the races in there and make sure they're good. But even though this seal is good, I'm still going to have to pull it out on both sides to get at the bearings behind it. I want to inspect all that really, really well. So I'm definitely going to have to be pulling that out, and these things will get destroyed when they get pulled out. So a new set of seals for the front wheels as well. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below and I'll get right to them. And as always, a very, very special thank you to our Patreon supporters. Until next time, safe travels. Bye.